Hi everyone who's just joined us. Welcome to the session today. So as you will have seen on the event description, you're joining today next industry panel event, which is the challenges of making a social impact. So we have a panel of experts, as you will see on the screen, and shortly I will be passing over to our chair, Borge. Before I do that, I just wanted to clarify how the session will work today and any kind of Zoom etiquette that we needed to flag. So firstly, you will see at the bottom of your Zoom screens that you have two ways to interact with us in the session. So firstly, there is a chat box. So please do use that chat box to confirm any kind of logistical questions you have, any questions that are purely going to be for Imperial, for us, kind of processing and supporting you through the event. Those questions and that chat is not seen by the panel, it's not part of the Q&A section. And you will also see a box titled Q&A, so that is purely for you to pop your questions in. Feel free to put them in as the session is running or kind of when we open it out for questions, completely up to you. What we will be doing is looking at those questions throughout the time and then addressing them later on in the session. I know a number of you sent some questions in advance, so thank you very much for submitting them. We had a number of questions, so we'll get through as many as we can in the time that we have, and obviously dependent on that also depend on how much time we open for the questions later. But just please do add anything extra in and we'll get to it if we can. So what we do ask is if you could refrain from using the raised hand function on there, and like I said, if you have a question for us or having any problems accessing the session, just use that chat function. So what I'll be doing now is passing over to Borge. So in a moment you'll probably see me drop off the screen and I will be leaving you with our excellent panelists today. So enjoy the session and look forward to kind of coming on at the end and just closing off. Just final thing to flag is that at about 5 to 1, you will see that there'll be a registration form link going into the chat. So please complete that if you're heading off just before the session closes, just so we can log your attendance. And without further ado, I'll pass you over to our chair, Borge.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this event where we're going to talk a bit about social impact careers. And we have some really great, interesting people joining us from various parts of the social impact sector. And I thought to just get us started, each panelist will introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their background, their careers, and how they ended up doing what they do around social impact. So I was wondering if perhaps Olivia would like to start by telling us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, great to sort of meet you, although I can't see you. So my name is Olivia Sibony, and I am the co-founder and CEO of an organisation called Seed Tribe. Seed Tribe is a spin-off of another organisation called Angel Investment Network. So what we do is we connect impactful entrepreneurs, so entrepreneurs who marry profit and purpose together. We connect them with angel investors, as well as people who can also invest their time or resources, and not only money, into helping startups to scale. I also wear another hat where I am working with a social enterprise called the Hot Breakfast. And at the Hot Breakfast, we have a similar aim to use business as a force for good, but rather than connecting entrepreneurs with different types of investors, we create round tables with a diversity of people who all share a purposeful aim of using business as a force for good, but from a wide section of industries, backgrounds, etc. So we look to break down silos in order to promote fresh thinking and to work together to build a better tomorrow. So that's where I am now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Olivia. Mohamed, would you like to go next?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everybody, where you are. And my name is Mohamed Osman. Just like some of you here on the call today, I was an international student studying postgraduate in London. And I am from Kenya. and I have 20 years of experience working in philanthropy and grant making, where we have done everything from very vanilla grant making to very high-end impact investment over the few years I've been here. And in the last 10 years, I've been working for the Elton John AIDS Foundation, where I have led their grant making budget for about $100 million to help end AIDS in many of the countries where the foundation has been working. How did I end up here? And I left university in Kenya when I was fairly young, and I went back to my rural home to solve the problems that we were facing there, which is water issue. There was no clean water. And after 3 years of doing that, I wanted to kind of build my career globally. So I came to university in London to do my postgraduate, and I have never looked back. So that's me for now.
Great, thanks, Mohamed. Tracey, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Tracey Austin. I think I'm probably the oldest of the group, so I'm going to claim a lot of ground in terms of that. I wear 3 hats at the moment, in that I'm actually working on a wholesale impact fund in South Africa. I'm South African, trying to get pension funds to contribute towards an impact investing fund to go right down to SMEs. And as you would guess, pension funds and SMEs don't usually talk to each other. I'm also working with a philanthropist in the Gulf region around corporate governance and trying to elevate how important and advocate really how important that is in terms of any form of social investment. And then I also sit on one of the impact venture capital funds investment committees here in London of Big Society Capital. So looking at some of the venture capital investments in the UK. My journey was quite unorthodox in that I was working for a hedge fund back in 2012, and I knew something was amiss and that I wanted to use my skill set to do something more impactful. And I was seeing a lot of, this is in the jungles of Colombia, I was seeing a lot of inequality within Colombia, and it's actually made me reflect on a lot of what I had seen, although obviously privileged in South Africa. And I sort of took a sabbatical, and I was lucky enough to become an intern at the age of 37. Where I actually went to work for the CDC group and actually ended up running their fund of funds, which was the first impact fund to make private equity investments with a very clear impact thesis where impact was actually being tracked. And that feels like so long ago. And essentially my career has evolved from there, and I find one project and one job just becomes more exciting and better than the next. And I would just say that I think the thing that is probably I found very beneficial is working across the finance spectrum has given me a point of view to try and understand a different opinion. And hopefully you'll see that theme coming out today based on the great mix of speakers that you have. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. In terms of my background, I am an owner of a recruitment business called Prospectus. We are a B Corp, and our clients are largely within the social sector, the impact sector. I've been in recruitment for nearly 15 years. Most of that time within this sector. Before that, I dabbled a bit in journalism, in politics. Like Mohamed, I was an international student. Didn't quite know what I wanted to do after I finished, and thought I have to do something that I can enjoy, that involves people, and I ended up working in recruitment. At Prospectus, we are lucky enough to work with a huge range of organizations, from large private sector organizations like banks, Barclays, UBS and others, through to small social impact startups, consultancies, funders and philanthropists. And I think what they all have in common is that in some shape or form, they are trying to achieve social impact or affect some kind of change. Prospectus is a business of about 75 people. We decided to become a B Corp because we wanted to really live our values and be part of solution, be part of kind of business driving good solutions for society more broadly. Whilst we are a business like everybody else seeking to make a profit and be really sustainable, also wants to achieve impact through the people we work with. So that was kind of a very easy choice for us to make, actually. I thought to drive this conversation forward, and obviously you are in a situation where you're looking to think, or you're thinking about your careers, how you get started or continue your careers, and obviously the people around the table. We're not we're not physically in the same room, but on the panel, have sort of developed careers in the spaces that hopefully you're interested in. So I thought it'd be really interesting if we could perhaps start with Mohamed. Do you want to go next and just tell a bit about kind of why you made a choice to have a social impact career, go a bit more into that, and kind of how you got started on that career journey?
Absolutely. So I come from a big family. We have 5 in our family, and everybody has been pushed to be a doctor or an engineer. And I just felt like I wasn't quite that. I didn't want to be a doctor or an engineer, but I wanted to be useful to my community. I wanted to solve the problems that were right ahead in front of me. And like I said earlier, I come from a region in Kenya which is very drought prone, it's very dry, there's no water, and people were not able to cope. And I knew that there was water underground, or someone told me there was water underground. So when I went to university, I dedicated myself to understanding how to bring that water to the people who need it the most. And without having an engineering degree or a background in engineering, I joined a company which was drilling water wells to help the communities have clean, fresh water for the schools, for the kids around there, for their livestock, and for their farms. And that really made me realize the incredible goodwill that people have and how they're trying very hard to solve their own problems. And I wanted to be part of that solution. So after 3 years of doing what I did, and I came to England to study, I kept basically seeing more and more opportunities and more ways of applying myself. And it has helped me grow. It has made me become a better person. It made me connect back with myself. And also you can see the benefit really quickly. Working in HIV, for instance, if you give someone with HIV medications, the change is dramatic. You go from being very ill, unable to walk, to having a completely active life that like anybody's around you. And that kept me going. Obviously, the biggest issue we have is that there's a lot more problem and a lot of people who want to solve it, but have less money to do that. So how do you choose the right investment that will have the biggest return for the most amount of people without putting them under so much pressure to deliver? And that is what I've been working on since, and I'll be happy to talk about this a little bit more later on.
And I'm curious if so when you came to England, you did your master's, you had that background working in Kenya. What were some of the challenges you faced in terms of translating your experience into your first role, for example?
The first challenge is I thought I spoke English, and then I came here and nobody understood me. So that was not fun. But the biggest challenge for me was translating the ideas that people have outside of this European Western setting into practical solutions, because there's a ways where people work here, which is very different, but deep down it has the same values. Everybody wants to succeed, everybody wants to do good, everybody wants to be fair. So how do you then find that commonality across the board? How do you find that sort of humanity in Asia, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in the US, and then kind of peel away all the politics and find the humanity within it? And that's what I've been basically championing for. And as soon as I realized I can translate my ideas from Northern Kenya to an idea in New York, then I was comfortable.
It sounds like quite a transition, quite a translation. What, Tracey, I was wondering about, you mentioned that sort of about I think you were in Colombia, you kind of experienced these kind of huge diversity in wealth or inequality, and you decided to have a change. Can you just talk to us a bit more about that process and kind of how practically you went about making that career change into a more impact-focused career?
So I just want to caveat that the cleaning service have come outside my house right this minute. So if it gets noisy, you may have to go to somebody else. So I, philosophically, I think anybody that's looking at social impact, or however you define it, I think there's a philosophical component of the job. And then for me, I look at it from a values perspective, and I was finding in inequality, but particularly the lack of fairness and justice, and my huge desire for respect, that was suddenly overwhelming me in my day job. I was actually sent to Colombia to divest a gold mine, which was in one of the poorest areas in Colombia. And I just felt that doing my day job, I didn't feel very authentic. But at the same time, and I was lucky enough to have, and I think we'll touch on this later on, but I was lucky enough to have some reserves where I thought, this just isn't for me and I need to find something else to do. I didn't exactly know what it was. The word impact investing wasn't, which is how I sort of align to social impact, wasn't really widely used. It wasn't widely known. And in actual fact, when I left my role at the hedge fund, I got a lot of backlash from social circles, from what I thought were friends, from some of my peer group, because I'd grown up in banking and finance, saying to me, what's wrong with you? Are you mad? Have you lost your sort of mind? And I was like, no, there has to be another way. And I spent a lot of time in those 9 months that I took off reflecting, talking to as many people, which is something I'd always encourage everyone who's thinking about this to do, because there's just so many takes on this. And ultimately, I think the thing that we shouldn't be shy about is we're actually looking about deriving an income and making a living out of doing this. So it has to make money. It has to be sustainable. And I've presided over a lot of not-for-profit investing as well in my last role at Media. And I think if anyone has a greater and more important job, it's for the social enterprises and the not-for-profits to stay in business and to keep doing what they're doing. And they do well to adopt some of the more robust business practices. So for me, it was about finding an environment where I could translate those financial skills, but still actually live and apply my personal philosophy. And I was lucky to find that in the CDC group.
And when you got into CDC group, so you had a specific skill set, I guess, so that were the skill sets completely translatable? What sort of adjustments did you have to make? Kind of learnings for you to really be able to apply those skills in this different type of environment?
I was lucky in the sense that my skill set was entirely translatable. I mean, I describe myself as an emerging markets person, and so I was in an environment where understanding those markets, having worked and traveled extensively, was massively advantageous, and having the financial background was totally sort of meant that I could hit the ground running. The biggest shock that I probably faced was how people responded to me when they saw that I was an intern and when they asked me what my previous job was. And the reason I say this is I'm a reasonably confident person, but even that can really pull on one's confidence, because you're going from a position of sort of authority, and you get a lot of sort of social clout based on your position, and then suddenly to have that taken away. I was still the same person, I still had the same skill set, and in actual fact I wanted to do more good now than ever, and yet I had people questioning my motives. So I think that was the hardest part for me to adapt at the time, and it particularly is maybe applicable to some of the older students on the call, if you ever go through that process.
Great, thank you. Olivia, would like to go back to you, and you're obviously an entrepreneur, so you've founded companies, and so what's the particular time when you decided you wanted to be an entrepreneur, to do your own business? Tell us a bit about how you got to do that.
Sure. So I would say my career has definitely been quite a sort of pattern of randomness, but I've always had a very strong social sort of leaning, I guess. And after university, I'd never heard of impact investment. I don't even know if that was a concept at the time. So I went to work in charities, and actually, to Tracey's point, I found this sort of difficult disconnect between the work of the charity and the sort of lack of financial sustainability associated to it, and the fact that the charities I worked in always were only able to plan a few months, a year, a couple of years ahead, because they didn't know where the next source of funding was and what the next direction was going to be. So it was a little bit challenging for me to sort of reconcile myself with these disparities. So I somehow ended up being a chef, and then working at Goldman Sachs, thinking it would be temporary, and then 7 years later, as they managed to lure you in more and more, I was still there, until I really realized that actually I had, incredible as the experience was in terms of learning and development, it was also, I was moving further and further away from the sort of where my heart really was. So I jumped ship, and I launched my own startup, which was a food tech platform. And I had really strong social and environmental aims for my startup. But the one biggest error I did was to not really embed the purposeful mission itself into the ethical side into the mission itself. So essentially we were a social dining platform. So imagine Airbnb, but for food, where people could connect at different dinner places in different spaces organized by different chefs. As the startup evolved, we had to make these incredibly difficult decisions between growing it to make it financially exciting enough for angel investors to come in and invest, while me also wanting to keep that really strong social and environmental focus. And the more it went, the more they were at odds with each other. And we'll talk about it more along the panel in terms of, profit and purpose. But that was my mistake, not embedding it strongly enough into the business model from the start. So we did that for 5 years, and it got to the point where it just would not have been financially sustainable to pursue its social and environmental goals. And we, of course, had to pay the bills and had to please our shareholders, our investors who put, money in and were expecting a hockey stick curve for the return on their money. So we sold it to our counterpart, our US counterpart. It's still going, although under COVID, I'm not quite sure what would have happened. And then I went to set up a spin-off business, Seed Tribe, which I'm still running. And that's where I really use my learnings. And I was looking at what's it like from the other side of the table when you're on the sort of investor's side. And it was incredibly challenging being an entrepreneur on every single level. The most incredible learning experience, but really challenging on every single front, including the fundraising, which was my least favorite part. So I wanted to make that journey better for entrepreneurs because I really empathize with the challenge and pain and trauma they would all go through. But one of my biggest learnings was, how do you make sure that you don't move away from your social or environmental mission as you're looking to scale the business? And there are ways to do that, but it's a pretty narrow focus and market. And again, we can talk about it more, but for me, you have to look at business. I look at businesses where the two are inextricably tied. And the more impact you have, the more money you make, and vice versa. And if the two are not perfectly aligned, it's great while everything's going really, really well. And the minute you have an unexpected downturn, you have to make incredibly tough decisions. And ultimately, you need to pay the bills. And that is the number one decision you have to make. And everything else goes out the window. So it was through a lot of learnings that it got me to where I am.
I think that's been really interesting, and I think in all the three of you, when you sort of talked about your careers, is that I think mission and purpose has been sort of intrinsically part of that. I think it used to be that you often thought about sort of charities on one side, businesses on another, but as we are at the moment, it feels certainly to me that businesses are becoming more purpose-driven. Sometimes charities are becoming more commercially driven, and so on. So, how do you? What are your views on kind of how you balance mission and impact? How do you make sure you get both? Is that in an organization, and is it possible? Anyone want to pick up on that?
I'll have a go at it, just because I'm actually working on that project at the moment in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. A lot of the donors in this scenario are actually oil companies. And to go to an oil company now asking for your annual donorship fee is really, it's almost as if they don't want to feel the call. Thank goodness that we're not having to knock on doors physically. But I would say that I really think it goes back to something that Olivia highlighted, and that's around your own honest mission and your own honest alignment. If you've been taking money, or you've been working along a very loosely defined mission, you're probably going to be struggling now more than ever. And I think the reason I say that is the value add that a not-for-profit or a social enterprise generates has to be very clear at the outset. And if that value is really consistently clear, the chances are that your good donors and your sort of supporters will see you through tough times. I would say it's very difficult to suddenly start demonstrating value when it hasn't been there before, and it's very hard to demonstrate alignment when it hasn't been there before. Now, that's easy to say when you're trying to, fix something, but I would, for me, and then maybe it touches on something that Olivia also alluded to, is as an investor, some of the biggest respect when I was wearing either the very for-profit or the slightly, let's say I was wearing the CDC hat at the time, or when I worked at Palladium where I was doing direct investing into small, medium enterprises, was actually when entrepreneurs said no to my money because there wasn't mission alignment. And that's a very difficult decision when you're waiting on a check. And I think that that is actually sometimes the best decision for your business. And that's what I mean about alignment. So whether you're dealing as a small and medium enterprise, or you're actually a social enterprise or a total charity, you really sometimes need to be very mindful of what that money means and how it really aligns to your value proposition. And I would just say that honesty, the more you practice that, I think the more resilient you're going to be in the long run.
Olivia, if we could go back to you, you said your first business kind of moved away from the social impact, and I'm curious to how did you realize that? What had clearly been really important to you, so kind of how you responded by moving away from the business, but just tell us a bit about how you found that particular part of it.
Sure. I mean, if I were in it just for the money, I would have stayed at Goldman Sachs. So I felt really strongly that I wanted to do something that I really, really cared about. And essentially, so when I was at Goldman's, I was posted in India for a year to set up an HR department for them out in India. And it was there that I met people. I didn't want to have that expat lifestyle. I wanted to just be local, I guess. And the way I made friends locally was essentially always around a dinner table. And I realized the incredible power of sharing food and how that is able to unite people from all around the world. So that was one of my inspirations. And I had another really big sort of niggling thing, which was just the unsustainability of the food supply chain. So I guess represented by a Tesco value chicken. And I felt that if you can afford it, ideally you should not be buying that. Then you need to just be more aware of where your food comes from and the impact that food supply chain has on, as we now know, potentially the entire world. So I was driven by both the kind of sustainability of food and the social aspect of, the magic of what food really does and to bring people together. So that's what I really wanted to grow. And really it was to break down barriers and bring people together, a little bit like the social enterprise I'm doing now, actually, funny enough, to break down barriers and enable people to connect that would not ordinarily connect. However, when you look at the numbers, ultimately the only people who could afford to go to the types of dinners that were being put on, or the only people who would pay to do these things, were wealthy middle-class people who essentially were already well networked, well connected, and didn't really need this other than just something really fun. So we ended up essentially in order for our very tight margins to work, organizing very fun, wonderful, lovely dinners in beautiful spaces, cooked by Michelin-starred chefs for people who sort of really didn't need any extra socializing, and that was the challenge. And the more we tried to be more inclusive, the more we tried to sort of go into more challenging areas, the more we tried to represent cuisines that were from countries that were maybe not so popular or fancy on the menus, people just didn't buy tickets to those dinners, and so the only ones that succeeded were the ones that were just at that really high end. And we just, I'd love to hear, both what Mohamed and Tracey think of that sort of breadth versus depth of impact. And for example, in their sort of, how you're going to choose who receives AIDS packages, for example, how do you, you have to make that decision. We could have looked at really incredible, impressive number of diners, but actually we didn't really go very deep into pockets of society. And to Tracey's point earlier, you need to follow where your heart is. And I just knew that the more we scaled the business, the more we would be reinforcing a type of dinner that was lovely, but not really what I wanted to commit my life to.
Thanks, Olivia. Mohamed, I was wondering if you might reflect a bit on that point between scale and depth, because obviously as a funder, you will have looked at a lot of different projects to invest in, and kind of what might you be looking for in terms of impact and how you balance impact and return, or what that might look like.
Absolutely. I think I was a little bit more fortunate because I was operating within a foundation which was fairly well resourced. So we already have an internal sort of dynamics which we could go out and start finding the partners we're looking for. But the reason why we went for the social impact was three main things. One is that it kind of brought a different kind of measurement. It forced us to think about measurement outcomes, which we were thinking about before, but not in this level where we are accountable to someone else. And then it also allows us to access new monies which were not coming to the healthcare before, from other investors who will never have looked at a healthcare investment. And the third value for us to go down the social impact route was that the flexibility. So because we're focusing so much on the outcome, there was a space to innovate and being creative around how you get there. Until then, it was purely, we had a formula of getting there. We have a formula of finding people with HIV, which if you apply fully, you will get there. But with the outcome-based model, it didn't matter if you had 4 or 5 out of those tools to get there. You had to get there, right? And that made people think differently about the solution they were applying to the problem. And I was very proud to be part of the first ever HIV social impact bond, which was launched here in London, and which has been transformational for the National Health Service. Saved a lot of money for the health service. It has been able to pull, we have all talked about bending the curve. It has been able to bend the curve for HIV in London significantly. And year on year, we had a 40% reduction in new infections. But that happened not because we didn't have the money to do it ourselves. It was we needed other talents to come with us. We needed investors who are different motivations, different push to allow us to think differently about our solutions. And this is what I'm kind of putting out there to the people who are on the phone, that there are other ways you can apply yourself, even if you're not fully in a social impact investment company. As long as you can bring your other skill sets and tools to be able to push the agenda a little bit further to ensure there's value for the people there's respect, there's fairness, but also you're accountable to the numbers, you're achieving the results at the highest possible level, and the measurements are genuinely reachable.
And I think that's really interesting in terms of looking at, obviously, people who are participating today. You're looking at sort of potentially thinking about careers within impact, I can imagine. So Tracey, for example, if you're recruiting, what might you be looking for? Is a combination of skills, experience, attributes to kind of, when you're looking to hire people within your organization, for example, what's really important?
Sure. So I actually just wanted to make a comment on what Mohamed said around, I think I'd encourage everyone to go have a look at impact bonds, which are different to bonds. But the reason I say that, because I think what comes out of those structures is that you can really see the role of partnerships, and you would be able to see, Mohamed, I'm sure you can share the details on the bond you guys did, but you'd be able to see the role that the foundation played and the role other players play in terms of the different skills needed to pull off an impact bond. It definitely doesn't rely on one type of investor. And I think that's my theme, in which I'll segue into the hiring question, is when we talk about the topic, we tend to have a very binary view, and either you're on the social side or you're on the profit side, or sometimes you believe you span the two, and then there's this natural tension. I personally take a different view, and particularly when you're dealing in emerging markets with weak ecosystems, I think you need a whole combination of players, a whole different type of money to work together. And I'm a massive fan of, it's not done very widely and as to the level that I think it should be, but I'm a big believer in blended finance, because people or investors can still participate alongside each other, have different return expectations, but have a clearly defined relationship like the impact bond on who's doing what and what the return should be. So to your question then about skill set, how does one apply that? Well, first of all, I look at attitude. For me is massively, energy and attitude just go hand in hand. And then I look at transferable skill set. I'm also very much aware that the gentlemen amongst the room, or generally guys tend to apply for a job when they have 60% of the creds, where the women tend to wait until they have about 80 or 90% of the creds. I actually think that the whole reality is that honesty around, you don't necessarily have to be 100% fit for a job, but you need to be about 70 to 80% there, with the massive ability to demonstrate those transferable skills through your energy and your attitude to want to learn and to want to be part of something. So for me, when it comes to looking at skill sets, I'm massively focused on some very robust, fundamental transferable skills. Yes, there are certain technical nuances. And I'm not, being flippant when I say that. Obviously, I respect that if you're going to say you're a coder and you can't code, then, well, obviously you can't do the job. But where I'm going, for example, is I'm working on corporate governance. Corporate governance is such an unsexy, unattractive area to want to attract people to. But the reality is it fundamentally underpins everything we do. And now to get people to work in that and design programs, I'm actually probably looking at a lot of healthcare professionals who are actually showing that ability to use that lateral thinking around how you design around healthcare programs with the fundamental general business skill. And we're using that skill set to transform them into corporate governance experts. So that's the approach that I take, because I don't think you're going to always find the perfect fit, or it's going to take a lot of time and money as well.
I think I really agree with that. And obviously, when we recruit for clients, for example, at Prospectus, very rarely do you have somebody who has 100% of the what the spec is, and I think it's a lot of time it is about transferable skills, it is about energy, it's about attitude. And I think more and more we see that sectors are aligning, and we find people organizations who are really looking to in the social sector, really looking for candidates who are coming from the commercial sector, and vice versa. So we're just starting to work with one of the biggest banks. We're looking for somebody for a senior leadership role who has social sector background, and then you get foundations who are looking for somebody coming out of consultancies or out of investment banking or out of an NGO and so on. So I do think you don't have to have a linear career. A career is about learning, and it's a journey, and it can take different directions. But it's you don't have to, if you want to have impact, you don't have to work for charity. You don't have to work for a business if you want to earn money. Even if you will earn less money in the social sector than you will in the commercial sector, most likely. Even though that perhaps is also changing a little bit in some organizations. I think one of the questions that sort of came to us beforehand was how you measure success in your roles, and I guess that could be related to values, it can relate to outcomes, and so on. Is there any thoughts on that? What does success look like for you in your different careers, in your different roles? Throwing it out there. Who wants to go first?
Happy to start. I imagine we've all got similar but different perspective. I guess it's often the $1 million question, and I'm really keen to hear what Mohamed and Tracey think about it. And I know you're probably a lot more involved in that aspect. So just my quick personal perspective is that I've not seen one consistent measure of impact measurement that spans all sectors, industries. I guess to my point earlier, it really depends where you're looking to have impact, and looking at whether you're sort of measuring breadth or depth, for example, is the sort of first differentiator in how you're going to start that measurement. So I think there are interesting frameworks that help you question how to go about deciding what you want to measure and report on and how you do it. So if you're going to say, okay, well, we're going to build medical devices that are going to help reduce, help people become more active so that we can help reduce obesity. You could say, okay, well, we're going to do it by charging, by reaching a huge number of people, but they're the people who are already sort of healthy and fit, etc. And you could demonstrate incredible breadth of impact by showing the number of users that have joined your classes or whatever it is. Or you could actually look to dig a lot deeper and go, okay, well, which are the populations that are most at risk of obesity, and what are their behavior patterns, and how do we help them overcome that barrier? And actually there your numbers would look very, very different, because you probably wouldn't have such a high take up of that system, but actually you could correlate it directly with where the risk of obesity is likely to rise the most, and then use that as your marker. So it's I think you really need to think very carefully about how you're going to go about it, what genuine impact you're going to have, and then decide what that genuine measure of impact is, rather than it. I've not seen anything that spans all the boards.
Right. Mohamed, any thoughts from you on that?
Yes, for me, it's very straightforward. Working in HIV, you just pop a pill and you don't die. So we can quickly sort of show impact by reducing the number of deaths to HIV and to new infections. But it's bigger than that, because then people ask you, what was the impact on the system? Was it worth the pain doing it in this way? What was the impact on the healthcare? Did you bring more people into the healthcare who would not have been brought in too early on in their care? So that's important to balance between a very core outcome related impact, which you can touch and measure, and also much more societal impact about what has your work achieved. On a personal level, for me, I measure my success and my impact through my team. If we as a team feel like we have achieved what we set ourselves to do, I think for me that's critical. For me is that everybody understand that we have gone out there, we have given our best, and we have achieved 4 or 5 of our KPIs without breaking each other up. And also the most important thing is, once you are gone, will that be sustained? Will that work continue going on without you? What have you left behind? What have you put in place to ensure that that kind of work will go on for many, many years for people who need it? And that's how I balance my impact. I have a personal level impact, team level impact, and then the work specific impact.
Great. I love how you structure that. That's really, really helpful. Tracey, any comments from you on that?
Yeah, I think it's always hard to add to those really two great sets of comments. But I would say that if we just touch on some of what Olivia said, formalizing it from an investment language perspective, I think the thing I strongly agree with is that you need some kind of theory of change. You need some kind of clear causal relationship being defined about what it is you want to do. And I think that is really important at the outset when you start to do something. To be slightly contrarian, and my pet peeve is when I talk to a lot of asset managers who suddenly are now all doing impact investing, for example, they will say, oh, we've all done impact. And I'm like, how? And they say, well, we're investing in a really remote area, and therefore by sheer default, we're having impact. And I'm like, all right, so you've not really, it's more by luck than it was by design. And I think that's where I think the fundamental difference is, that there's a real intentionality at the outset to try and bring about this theory of change. And I think to Mohamed's point about outcomes, I think the idea is not just about the taking the pill and measuring the effect. I think it's about what is the systemic, what's the long term, what's the sustainable, what's going to be left when we're gone or when you've stopped doing whatever you're doing. I think that's really the outcome that we look at. And I would say on a personal level, success for me is around, I'm massively enthused by the fact that now everybody looks at me as if I'm actually done a worthwhile thing with my life and chosen a noble career. And I'm being flippant, but what I mean by that is that instead of having to motivate for the industry and the sector, is that it's now being widely adopted and the language is a lot more generic. But what I would say is that if we can start to get more players from different sides of the spectrum, the investment spectrum is what I'm talking about, mixing a philanthropist and a pension fund and an SME in the same conversation, and understanding most of them are trying to address the same need, but coming at it from very different directions or ways, and having that conversation and starting to be able to create mechanisms and forms of intermediation where you can actually think about how you're going to collectively solve a problem. To me, that's the first sign of success. We've got some way to go, but I'm seeing a lot of that kind of behavior coming into the fore more and more.
And thank you, Tracey. And I'm sure we have some brilliant students and grads here who want to help drive that change going forward. And I think we're now at a time of the event where we are getting more direct questions from people participating. So I would encourage all of you who are watching, listening, to share your questions with us. So I think one has come through saying that, is it realistic to aim starting a career right after grad school in the social impact sector without having previous experience in a big firm, or would it be harder to develop the necessary skill set as a professional? And sort of, so basically, is it better to start a career in a big firm and then go into the social sector, or should you start it directly, or could you start it directly in the social sector? I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's one of those questions that there isn't really a right or wrong answer to, because your career could start anywhere and you can achieve the impact you want, or you didn't even know you wanted or didn't know you could achieve. And there are different routes. But are there any thoughts from the panel on can you go straight into an impact career from grad school?
I guess my thoughts on that is that the thing about impact to me is it's a layer of ethic onto business. And so it really depends where you care most about having some impact. Do you care about water like Mohamed did in his early career? Do you maybe Tracey could have seen gold mines and thought, actually, I actually want to work in the mining industry and make that more ethical. So actually it's just, I could have looked at Goldman Sachs and gone, actually, let me work in fintech. So I think it's not impact. It's really where's the area that you care most about and specialize in that and try and have a positive impact on that industry.
I just want to add to that and say that I think there's also a dimension around your personal circumstances. I'm a massive advocate for equal salaries in the impact space. I think they deserve as much, and I'm on the record for saying, if not even more, than anybody that's pursuing an industry or career where there's absolutely no social impact. But that being said, there is a notion that, and there is probably an expectation that not-for-profit spaces pay lower salaries, or that a social impact environment pays a lower level of compensation. So I think that does affect your personal situation. I just think you need to look at that holistically and see whether, whatever you're going to be doing, I think you are probably going to be thinking about it as a journey, and that you're going to do it in a way that you can build on it to take you ultimately in the right direction, and that every role, every job that you do is a component that is building on it. And I'm still building on my experience, where when I started using very much direct skill set from the finance world, and I'm now transitioned right to the other side of the spectrum, where I'm having to understand the charity, the not-for-profit, the philanthropy space better. And actually now I've come to appreciate and really value how much more I stand to learn from a space that I didn't traditionally talk to or work with. So I think it is very much a personal thing, but it is something that I don't think it's finite, and I don't think it's complete. So see it as evolutionary, see it as something that's going to be transitioning. And definitely you won't be judged based on making decisions relative to your own personal situation. I know a lot of you are sitting with a lot of student debt, so I think that also has a factor which you have to think about. I
fully agree with that. I think about what you love to do. If you start by that, what are you good at, what do you enjoy doing, and then you can work your way forward from that, and your career can go into different spaces, and you can start in social impact, you can start in business. There's no right or wrong answer to that. I think it's just following what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, and what you would like to do. We're getting lots of questions through, which is great, from the panelists. One is here from Johannes. Is it possible to link investment funds with the UN SDGs? If yes, how is that currently being done? Does anybody want to, Tracey, you might be in the middle of that particular topic.
I'll give it a go, but of course I don't hold the floor on this, so I welcome comments from Olivia and Mohamed. But So from an investment fund perspective, if we're applying the sort of private equity asset management kind of lens on it, I think, and this is my inside perspective, that pretty much based on how funds are being raised these days, if you're looking to speak to investors to invest into funds, if you don't have a position on SDGs and how you're somehow meeting them or supporting them, you're pretty much not going to raise funds. So I don't think that necessarily means that we're meeting those SDGs, because we all know the gap's big and it's probably gotten a whole lot bigger post-COVID. But I think that there is a whole way in which there's a new normal that you have to be thinking about SDGs. Whether we're actually measuring that or evidencing that, I think that's a whole other discussion, and I'm not sure that I think that that's happening. But definitely having it in your pitch, in your fundraising, as part of your investment thesis, I think these days is pretty much unavoidable. Where I'm seeing some interesting, and maybe this speaks about the non-asset management, non-private equity space, is when we look at institutions which are actually delivering on the least popular ones, like partnerships or social justice. I think those are really interesting to see how those are being brought to the fore more and more. But I'd say by and wide now, it's very rare that I think you are not setting up these funds with an SDG focus. I don't know if Mohamed or Olivia, you want to add to that?
I agree entirely. If you don't have an SDG focus, then you are completely sort of backing down the wrong tree. But also there's some specific SDG goals which are easily fitting with impact investment, and there's some which are not. And what I think my worry that we will see that the easier ones like global health or education might get the money, but the harder ones like poverty and violence and stigma will struggle to get the money.
Olivia, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with both Tracey and Mohamed on all of those points. And for me, when I was trying to sort of think what impact meant when I was setting up Seed Tribe, I'd been quite involved in the SDGs before that. And actually, honestly, I felt that I needed a framework in order to be able to help decide what impact meant, because otherwise, you know, to Tracey's point earlier around setting up in a remote area, you could simply say, I'm creating loads of jobs and that's having an impact. And so actually this provides a really good framework in terms of looking at the priorities of where the biggest challenges are in the world and how we can look at them. So that is really helpful. Unfortunately, I also agree with Mohamed's point that some of them are easier to tackle than others. When you're looking at marrying profit and purpose together, for me at Seed Tribe, I see anything, you know, things that are medical or environmental are definitely the two biggest trends that I see that are just the most straightforward in terms of bringing in a profit model into it. And if you're looking at things around, you know, no hunger or reduced inequalities, it's possible, but people need to be so much more creative in how they're going to make that a financially sustainable business model. So, you know, some are just much easier to tackle than others, I guess.
Right.
I'm actually massively working with corporate governance under SDG 17, which is around stronger institutions and social justice. And we've actually tried to flip it around to say to a lot of corporate donors, how many of your other ventures are actually hitting SDG 17? And so I think, you know, it's really about actually trying to find that niche and trying to market that area, because I totally take the point that we're going to end up with a very skewed set of goals where we go to the lowest hanging fruit. So I would say that it is an opportunity as well as a massive challenge if you can. Great,
thank you. As we kind of draw towards the end of the session, there is a question on COVID-19, which obviously is probably unavoidable at the moment. The question is from Huai, and it says, do you think COVID-19 will push a drive into the social impact sector, driving a shift in current mindsets? So I guess the way I would interpret that, do you think COVID-19 will make more people, more organizations think with a more impact mindset? What's the panel's thoughts on that? Mohamed, what do you think?
I think for me, every crisis has an opportunity, presents an opportunity. And I think we need to look around and see what COVID has been able to show us, that you could do things differently. And I'm going to segue a little bit into careers. For the people who are on the phone now, this shows that you can work from anywhere. You can work from any country. You don't have to travel, leave your families behind. So maybe it will allow us to find talents staying in their own countries. Like, and I don't have to come to England to do what I am doing. I could still be in Kenya and apply myself there and elsewhere. So I feel like maybe COVID will allow more people to be able to invest in a smarter way. They will remove the barriers that sort of pull us away. But also COVID has challenges in the sense that there'll be a lot of people who are going to be unemployed. There'll be a lot of people who will not be able to make their money like they used to do before, and it will take a while for them to kind of pull themselves out of that sort of shock.
Olivia, what do you think?
I mean, the jury's still out, but I think, and I get, probably repeating myself on the earlier question in terms of, I think, so, it'll be even more skewed, and some areas will hugely benefit. I mean, education, healthcare will make leaps and bounds in particular areas, and others, gender equality, I'm a bit more concerned about, food. But I would say that actually, with the jury being out, this is an incredible opportunity to have much louder grassroots voice, and give people that sense of agency that actually that we can all make change here. And I think it relies upon all of us, and not just sitting back and waiting for the big corporations and the big governments to kind of drive that change. I think it's perfect timing for every single one of us as citizens, business people, etc., to shape it. And so I'm optimistic that we can make this happen.
Tracey, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm going to leave it on a slightly controversial note, just because I think that I actually do agree with both of the two previous speakers, but I'm going to say that my head and my heart don't align on this, because I'll give you an example where we've done extensive studies recently in South Africa, but also I've been doing work in the United Arab Emirates and also the Saudi Arabia. And what we have found is that most institutions tend to, when they say they're providing SME relief or they're providing COVID, there's a huge amount of grant money around for COVID relief at the moment. But when you actually look at what you have to need to, what you need to do, or what shape or form you need to be in to actually achieve or get that support, actually the hurdles and the barriers to actually access support are really insurmountable. And what we're actually seeing is, I think, is that we're going to see massive focus on how the inequality or the lack of parity is actually going to be exacerbated by this problem, because systemically our institutions, our banks, are still not really fundamentally realizing that they have to change the way they do business. And I don't think that COVID, although I think there's a massive amount of very short-term positive momentum and informal work going on, I think systemically, I'm not sure that that's going to really translate to real change. I hope I'm wrong, but I haven't seen it come through. So that's my slightly contrarian way in which I'll end.
I think if I end on a slightly more positive, I think having worked through the financial crisis and kind of seen the change that a lot of the people that came from banks, from other parts of the financial services sector into the non-profit sector, the impact sector after that, have been able to change how many organizations work, how they drive impact. I think that's been really positive. So perhaps COVID-19 can drive more people into the impact space who can then help shape how that works, but also influence back into the corporate space, because organizations are at the end people, and people make the choices. And so I hopefully it will have a positive impact in the long run. Rachel.
Hi everyone, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I know that you guys were kind of going through a number of really interesting questions. I'm aware of time, and for all of our attendees, I firstly just wanted to quickly flag that we've popped the registration form into the chat, so please do complete that. And originally the session was kind of due to be an hour-long panel until 1 o'clock. So I'm aware some of our panelists may need to kind of dash off in the coming minutes. So I wanted to make sure we take the opportunity to say thank them for joining us as well. And I know you had there was a number of questions that came through, so it's a really, really interesting and very kind of complex, varied subject in terms of social impact. So Thank you.
No, that's our pleasure.
Fantastic. Again, thank you also for kind of all of the attendees for submitting questions. In terms of the kind of the coming minutes, I suppose that kind of if there's any final thoughts that the panel wanted to share or any kind of final questions people would like to approach, then of course you'd be very welcome. We're aware, of course, that the time has run out very quickly.
There are a couple of questions that come through. I don't know if all the panelists seen them, but it's more specifically one to Olivia around her experience from working with angel investors. And there's another question around if it's a science and what's the metrics? Is it as involved as medicine and engineering? So there's a few quite sort of technical questions. So I was wondering if perhaps that could be answered separately, if any of the panelists had time, or how you would typically deal with that.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to drop off the call soon, if that's okay. So maybe I'm going to leave you, I think, in the capable hands of Olivia and Mohamed. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but just thank you. I've had a great time, and I wish you all success. The fact that I think you signed up today is evidence that you're looking to try and do this in a very pragmatic way that works for yourself. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tracey.
Same. Thank you, everyone. Maybe if Rachel wants to forward me my question, I would be happy to answer that in writing, and I'll come back to everyone.
No problem, we'll do.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Good.
Fantastic.
I think we're coming to a close.
I think so. I think so. And I can see the kind of as the attendees are probably on your way to your next classes, or kind of got for the next things on your list. So again, we just wanted to thank everybody for attending. If there are any kind of follow-up questions, then please do kind of feel free to flag anything as well to us. Obviously within careers, we're also here to provide some additional support, guidance, assistance also through those recruitment processes. So make sure you're kind of flagging those questions and coming to any of the sessions. And just to make you aware that our drop-in is going to be running as well on a weekly basis. You'll see the information on Simplicity if you'd like to join that. So kind of myself and Bagel will kind of exit the meeting now, and thank you again for joining.
Thanks for having me. Good luck.
Thanks everyone, bye.